I live in Australia, and 3 to 4 meter great whites and tiger sharks are not uncommon where we dive. A group of us did a deep dive, 45 at a site, and the visibility wasn't great, maybe 5 meters. The site is sort of a cave, a large underwater cavern with lots of light and multiple large entrances. It can be a hard site to find, so my buddy and I laid down a line from the anchor to the entrance. At the end of the dive, somehow my buddy and I got separated leaving the cavern. The standard procedure is to search the area for 1 minute and then surface. In our case, we couldn't surface immediately. We had about 20 minutes of decompression to do, sit at 6 meters and let our body release built-up nitrogen. The line is nowhere to be found, and I'm a bit disoriented from searching, but it's time to surface. My decompression time is racking up. I use my compass to get roughly in the direction of the boat, but because the vis is crap, I have to be pretty dang accurate if I hope to find the boat or anchor line. I'm worried if I don't find the boat, I'm going to have to float in the current for 20 minutes. This means I have to send up a surface buoy and hope the boat sees it and can send the tender boat to follow me. As I'm coming up, I see the line, and my buddy is coming up too. We both check we're okay and start our decompression. I'm a bit on edge at this point, but feeling better. Then, I see a shape off in the distance. It's sort of white, sort of gray, and moving against the current. My first thought is that it's changing light, we're closer to the surface now, or shadows from the dive boat. I see it again and realize it's not a shadow, and it's big. I've had sharks circle me before on dives, mostly they're just curious. If they drop their fins or get twitchy, then I'd worry. This one felt different though. All I could think was, fuck, that's a big white. These were also perfect conditions for them to hunt in, cold water, snapper were running the time of year and low visibility. We move up the line a bit for our next decompression stop, and the visibility gets a little better. Then I see it again. It's an Aden minke whale. Their pectoral fins have this splash of white, and that's what I kept seeing go by. Spent the next 15 minutes just watching this beautiful animal do hot laps around our boat. He got close enough that you could almost touch him. Saved someone from drowning while scuba diving. Person had an epileptic seizure at 85 feet of water in a pitch-black cavern that I was diving in. I was hovering above just watching the flashlights move about when I noticed one flashlight not moving. I swam down and was met with the other diver with no regulator in their mouth, eyes open, and just on their knees. The diver's buddy was next to them and in complete shock at what was going on and was not assisting whatsoever. 15 years of diving and instructor training came over me like it was second nature. I thought her regulator just come out, so I popped mine out and offered it to her. That was when I noticed she had mentally checked out. I popped my number 2 regulator in my mouth and attempted to put my number 1 regulator in her mouth, but her teeth were completely clenched. I then pressed the purge button to get air into her mouth and noticed her cheeks moving, so I knew the air was getting in there. That was good enough for me. I then grabbed her under her arm, got the regulator flowing in her mouth, swung to the opening of the cavern, and then up over 60 feet to get her to the surface. One on the surface did everything I was trained to do: inflate BC, dump her weights, get her on her back, and start towing to land. As I'm towing her in, she is regurgitating all the water she swallowed and inhaled. It seemed like gallons of water. Got her to land where other divers assisted me in getting all her gear off. She was breathing fine and alive, but in shock for a while and slowly came around like nothing happened. We were very lucky that we were only 10 minutes into the dive, or for sure we would have both been bent and spending time in a hyperbaric chamber. The crazy thing is she didn't tell anyone she had epilepsy, and when we later reviewed her consent form, she checked off no to epilepsy. I put myself at risk shooting up to the surface like that, but if I came across that situation again, I would not hesitate to save someone's life. Not exactly deep, but I was doing my certification dive for my PADI Basic Open Water Diver certification. I was at about 35 feet when my regulator started free-flowing. We've been taught to put our tongues against the roof of our mouth to still breathe in that scenario, and it worked just fine in the 70-degree pool. Unfortunately, I was in a 40-degree lake, the temperature of which adds a bit of stress and anxiety no matter the depth. I was fine until the tongue technique didn't work and I grabbed my backup regulator. When I tried to clear it of water and breathe from the backup yet still managed to suck water, I panicked. Thankfully, it being a certification dive and all, there was a dive master with my little group. I signaled an emergency ascent and he and I shot to the surface. I was in a complete panic like I've never known before or since. I was convinced I was dead. Once we got to the surface, he was smart enough to reach between my flailing arms and inflate my BCD. After a few seconds, he was able to calm me down, but I was unable to complete the dive. Every time my face went under the surface, I started having a panic attack. Eventually, I pushed through. Before it was said and done, I got my advanced certification, which involved a dive to 110 feet and several other challenges. Unfortunately, after that accident, diving gave me pretty bad anxiety and got to a point where pushing through was no longer worth it. It's been a long time since then and I'm not sure how I'd react now. Maybe after all this time, I'd enjoy it again. Diving at Gordon Rocks in the Galapagos. We had hoped to see hammerhead sharks that frequent the area. This is a pinnacle surrounded by deep water and strong currents. Our guy had us hold onto the rocks and wait to see who came by. While we were waiting, a group of 10 reef sharks were circling above us while 2 larger moray eels were popping their heads out a few feet away, opening their mouths and letting us know they meant business. Needless to say, I was a bit nervous and burning through my air at a rapid rate. Suddenly a group of dozen hammerhead sharks came into view. We had not discussed what we would do. The guide motioned for us to follow, and the next thing I know we are swimming with the school of sharks. This only lasted a few minutes before they broke away from the group. We began to move into our safety stop zone where currents were pushing us in different directions when I suddenly ran out of air. You don't get much warning when suddenly there is nothing left. So here I am 15 feet or so underwater, unable to reach my partner's secondary air, being forced to surface when I should still be chilling. At least the second time I ran out of air was a user error on my wife's part, anniversary dive, and I was able to get to the secondary air and get back to the surface safely. Oh, and then there was the time diving Bloody Bay Wall in the Caymans where there is a 5,000-foot drop and my partner was knocked out and kept going deeper, nearly exceeding the recreational limit of 120 feet or so. If I had not grabbed her, she might still slowly be falling into the abyss. Diving is super fun. While I was getting my open water diving license, we had to practice emergency procedures for if we found ourselves to be out of air. Now I was having buoyancy issues during the dive, and so had wasted quite a lot of my air by dumping it from my buoyancy vest. When we got to the bottom, around 10 meters or so, the instructor signaled to my buddy and me that I was to simulate being out of air. So there are a few hand signals you're supposed to do, like slicing your throat with your finger, etc. So after grabbing the instructor's shoulder and having their alternate air supply in my mouth, we do the necessary hand signals and do the simulated slow and controlled emergency ascent, stopping halfway to avoid the bends, although at the depth we were, I'm pretty sure that step wasn't necessary. All is well, and we go back down. It's now my buddy's turn to simulate an emergency ascent. However, as they were getting set up to do the drill, I noticed it getting harder and harder to breathe. I looked at my gauge, and it was empty. I was relatively relaxed at this point, since I knew exactly the procedure to follow, having just practiced it. So I'm slicing my finger across my throat at the instructor to indicate I'm out of the air, but she wags her finger to say no, slices her own throat, and then points to my buddy. It's not my turn to do the drill, it's my buddy's turn. At this stage, I'm getting no air at all. I start more frantically slicing my throat, which is met with more quizzical expressions and wags of the finger. So I grab my gauge, wave it at the instructor, and simultaneously begin to grab their alternate air supply. The instructor then removes the air supply she's breathing from and shoves it in my mouth, deviating from the procedure. This is when I start to panic a bit. The instructor then, accidentally, it turns out, knocks my goggles off my face, and I'm greeted with icy cold water to the face and zero visibility. I'm panicking at this point. This is a major deviation from the procedure. I figure something must be drastically wrong for my instructor to knock my goggles off. I grab onto the instructor's shoulder and forego the remaining hand signals, basically forgetting everything we had just practiced, and start kicking hard for the surface. At the surface, it was very choppy, so I got a few mouthfuls of water trying to manually inflate my vest. I've got about a 20-meter swim to the jetty, so head off while the instructor goes back down for my buddy. My buddy, meanwhile, is completely freaking out at the bottom of the ocean. She ends up losing one of her fins. After getting back on the jetty, both my buddy and I sat out of the rest of the day's activities. The instructor went back to collect my goggles and the fin. I hate to think how I would have reacted if I had run out of air 30 seconds later, me alone down there whilst my buddy and instructor were ascending. I did end up completing the course, but only went diving once after that. I experienced an anxiety attack on my final dive and decided maybe scuba was not for me.